Hey up and welcome to the Temple of Bleh. This is another conversation with Mark Abramson, the man who leads very little introduction in terms of the Roadrunner canon, and as such, I'll just refer you guys to the old episode on that one for the introduction. This is very much picking up where we left off. Bit of housekeeping on my part. It turns out I completely fucked up the RSS feed on the Apple Podcasts platform feed, whatever you want to call it, of this podcast. So those who rely on Apple Podcasts to listen to this might just notice I dumped 22 episodes or so on that feed all in one day. So apologies for that. You must have thought I was dead or something. Anyway, 1, 2, fuck shit up. I kind of tried to cut it off around about the turn of the century last week. And then the beautiful thing about doing these in two-parters and speaking to other people during is you start thinking of other things and you start connecting dots where you necessarily either there aren't any dots to connect or where you just didn't think of them before. So when I reflect more on the chronology of events which lead up to the Warner takeover, the first domino is conventionally the Edel stuff and then Universal buying their 50% or however much it was. But I think the first thing that happens, it's got to be Urban Discipline, hasn't it? Because that's where Leo Cohen falls in love with the brand. And that's where that's where he starts his affair with it.
It's amazing because there is a long history with Lior. And certainly, look, there's and I knew we would talk about him, and obviously he's fascinating. I remember I first met him. It was, with Rush Management and with Biohazard and stuff. It was what's his name who managed Fear Factory, who also managed Biohazard.
Scott Koenig?
Scott Koenig, who was like the guy who stood out at Rush Management, because Rush Management was all such legacy, legendary hip hop, but Biohazard obviously was always a band that kind of grayed those lines between hardcore and metal and hip hop. So that makes a lot of sense. Now, Lior, as a guy who is certainly, what's the saying, it's like the worst thing is about a person is to be ignored, is you'd rather be loved or hated than being ignored.
The worst thing about being talked about is not being talked about, or what's worse than being,
So Lior has certainly, has his lovers and detractors. I'm a fan. I always have been from day one. He's awesome, and there's, it never surprised me that the energies synced up, and it took a minute, obviously, but Biohazard certainly it was Biohazard Urban Discipline, which was really one of the first forays. It's like there was the first few releases that got us in that major label world. You're talking about Sepultura and Biohazard, and Urban Discipline really, look, the expectations were obviously much bigger, and certainly they wound up going over to Warner Brothers. That record is an amazing record, and it started wheels in motion, with Lior, that obviously years later would become something so much bigger.
So let's just take a step back and talk about the deal itself. So the idea was Warner had Biohazard, but given that they were effectively an outlier on their own roster, so someone came up with the idea, and I don't know who, to say, well, let's put their album out on something with more metal credibility, and then we'll scoop it up afterwards after that one comes out, and then we'll be lauded as having, recognized that potential at a street level. And it makes more sense, I guess. And from what I understand, Case hated that idea because you'd be pouring resources into a band that wasn't yours. I'm not sure how true that is.
Well, look, Case always Case was always trying to create his own thing.
Mhm.
He definitely never wanted to. He didn't want to. You're right. He didn't want to nurture something for someone else. His vision was always, we can be that big. We can do this. We can break these bands, and we can be a player on the same level. He had big ambitions, and
Yeah.
obviously they paid off. But yes, getting there's certainly he's a wise businessman to cut wise deals and to get the major label backing, the juice behind us, and it took a few different steps before we really got to that point. And I don't know the inner workings of where his head is at as far as, when he started doing partnership deals, I don't know how that hit him on the inside. But it certainly helped the label because, and there was no issues. It wasn't like we looked at this thing. It was like Biohazard was certainly not a band that was any kind of sellout or anything like that. It wasn't like, at the time when the brand truly was pure, you want to talk about these legacy years of Roadrunner. I mean, it's like you're talking about Biohazard, it's like, it's so it wasn't like all of a sudden they had stepped into like what happens later when you start playing around with mainstream rock stuff, whether it be like a Nickelback or whatever. Biohazard isn't that, so there was a certain amount of sense of victory of like, ha, we're taking our heavy shit and we're getting the big machine to help us, jump into that world and infect the mainstream world with our, ballsy stuff. And certainly, I mean, Biohazard were the goods, man. I mean, it was like they were amazing. And that record still stands up to this day.
Yeah. And timing as well, you mentioned in terms of the legacy. Timing is it 94? It is 94, isn't it?
Sounds about right. I could look that up.
Yeah.
I still got my thing here.
Yeah.
Let's see. No, it would have been before that because No Holds Barred came out in 92 was Urban Discipline.
Ah, okay. But either way, was immediately to the left of 93, which is obviously the big sort of like, that's the window where Roadrunner goes, okay, we're now planting our tent peg and hammering it in.
Well, it's because as you could see, when you look at this stuff, as I said before, and I did want to kind of take a look and confirm my memory. It's first off, you could see that 92 was when Case really wanted to try and that was our first steps into, we're going to widen ourselves and step in there because with 92 you had in addition to the landmark metal records of Deicide, Exhorder, Fear Factory, stuff like that. That was the year we had Urban Discipline and we had the Grunge Rock record Inside Yours. So it was like, so now you're talking about cutting a deal with Warner for that, and then the attempt to try and get our own grunge success. You could see that's where it was like, okay, now's where we try and step into the big leagues.
Yeah. Yeah, I mentioned, I think I always talk about this like expansion in that time where we're trying to move away from death metal, but it might have even been you or someone reminding me that no, Emergo was the imprint for that. Yeah, all the way from the start, like even the day that Holly Lane created, like ironed out the distribution with IRD, it was always RC, Road Racer, Emergo. That was always the entire idea. So I just need to get the idea out of my head that it was like it was a strategic change of direction. No, it was always that trajectory.
Because remember, it's not like, okay, when you look at Brian Slagle, the God that he is, and we all look at me, we all love it and worship Brian because we should. Brian's a metal guy, Brian's passion came out of um, us metal kids or whatever. Obviously he, predates, I mean, he helped, make my path, but it was like, but he was sitting in his bedroom and he was excited and he took action. That's not Case. Case is not a metal kid sitting in his bedroom cranking the early new wave of British heavy metal. It's like, that's not him. He was always looking to create a successful business. Now, Roadrunner's legacy comes from an incredible amount of success in a direction and all the pieces lining up, all the right team players. Case's brilliance was obviously in getting the right pieces of the puzzle and supporting them, following that. Had the pieces gone down, it's like you could sit there and argue the what ifs of life. It's like, but look, had Emergo been the thing that took off, we probably wouldn't be, you and I probably wouldn't be sitting here doing this. I wouldn't have chased Roadrunner, not because they were a bad label, but because that wasn't what I was interested in. Who knows? So, right. So there was always that thing of him trying to have success in a few different directions. And like I said, it's 92, 93. It's like you can see, it's like, there was some stumbles in there too. That was also the year he did the Star thing, which,
why is it such a blight on why is it such a stain on the legacy? You see, I think I've even seen interviews with Monty where it's like, it didn't quite work out how we expected. Was it meant to be geared up to be this huge thing, and it just completely shat the bed, or what?
And it wasn't. Look, I'm not the expert. All I know is it wasn't good. That's the thing. So it was such a left turn from what we were doing. It was that whole glam thing, and they tried to convince us of the edginess to it, but that wasn't there. And so, look, had it taken off, great. It was so much easier to swallow. Hey, we're going to try and have success with a grunge rock band like Grunge Truck. That's so much easier to swallow because there's still a darkness to it, and Tommy Accused was a big thing for me. But that's so much easier to swallow than Star, which, so we all kind of, that it stuck out like a sore thumb.
Fair. Oddly enough, I did ask Kathy, why didn't, especially in that time, sort of the 87, 88 period, why weren't we after glam? Because that was like at the height. And she said, they can't compete with the money. The majors were already in bed with it at that point. There was just no way you could get it. I was like, shit, never thought of it like that. I've had a right revelatory last few weeks, by the way. It's been wonderful.
But that's the thing. It's like, you can be, look, the industry is famous for this. Is something succeeds and then everyone else tries to get their version of it. And look, that's the music industry. That's not any one label, that's all labels. You could see it time and time again. Look, when you talk about grunge, you could see that all of a sudden you get, those first few bands start breaking big, and then everyone wants their grunge because grunge is the big thing. Welcome to business. So it is harder to be the guy who, and this is why, again, when you are looking to do a historical record of a label, is because the brand, they stepped out and they were the one. It's like, okay, if you wanted to do the grunge thing, you would go talk to the Sub Pop guys. You want to talk about metal, there are so few labels that really led the way and spearheaded it. And then, because now you're talking about Roadrunner, you're talking about Metal Blade, and yes, I know there are other labels, but so Roadrunner, Metal Blade, and Earache really were like the three that, carve the path. Now, that is not a diss on Noise or Century Media or
SPV.
all those other labels, right? Everyone had their success, but now you start talking about who had the level of success. It's like Roadrunner really was the one that had the most mainstream success of that extreme shit.
Yep.
It's like I mean, that comes obviously Sepultura exploded, and that allowed us to be able to keep moving forward with things like your deicides, your obituaries, and it was like, and Monty was great at finding this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like you look at all that, it's like success breeds success. I'm sure I said that last time too, but it's like you can look at this is a direct growth process that leads us to Slipknot.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like, so but I don't know that one happens without the other. It's like you can't argue because now it's just theoretical. I mean, I sat there and talked to Joey Jordison for ages about, how pivotal the Roadrunner stuff that we all grew up on was to him. Stuff like that. I mean, Corey is, again, he's a musical encyclopedia. But again, some of those early, it's like, yeah, you look at all this stuff and it comes from that. So it is harder to be the guy who paves the path.
It is because there's no precedent. If we put the Zeitgeist into this box here, Roadrunner is there because the thing that makes them successful in the mainstream is because they were a taste setter. Mm-hmm. And that's the special thing about that triad of Borovoy, Don, and Monty, which was they had a really effective workflow when trying to find bands. You couldn't form a band without them knowing about it, and therefore they had the muscle memory to go, this is X plus something new, and therefore we should try and push it and see if it has any viability, which is something which I imagine into the digital age, but it's something that's harder and harder to do as we become more and more saturated.
By the way, this is a perfect moment because Monty was actually very upset that I was far too nice to him in the first one. Really? You have to understand our relationship. And this is a perfect opportunity, by the way, as we're talking about the trendsetters and the path paving and those three. It is actually very, very important, by the way, as a side note, to point out that two of the three of those mocked me mercilessly and refused to back what turned out to be one of the biggest death metal bands of all time when I brought in for us Cannibal Corpse, my friends from Buffalo. So Monty has finally, decades later, accepted the fact that they are as good as I said they were.
Did he hear Violence Unimagined and then change his tune? It only took him 30 fucking years.
It was a few albums ago. It was he has finally accepted the fact, and he ridiculed me to no end, as they were cheese and no good.
Cheese and no good.
Victory. So Monty, take that.
Yeah, but I'm just to sort of match that on my side. He'll be the first one that says like his batting average was good and it was high, but good and high doesn't necessarily mean above 30%, 40%. That he's still in that region. He's probably about 50%.
Every A&R guy, Monty could tell you this as well. I think every A&R guy has, or certainly probably a lot of them have their list of ones that got away. And because once you're going after a band, then there's also first off, you don't always know. You have to look. There's a reason I never wanted to be an A&R. You have to not only see what they are, you have to see what they're going to be. And so you have to be able to have that kind of vision, and then you have to be able to sell it to the band and convince them that you're the one. Because if they're good, you're not going to be the only one. I mean, a lot of times you get lucky, and if you can jump in before anyone else cares, then you're not in a bidding war. I believe there was a point where Monty was in talks with Pantera. I mean, it's like you could sit there. But I think he was after them and just didn't get them.
It's an interesting story, as in how close to the wire it became. Yeah.
And so yeah, so his look, obviously, and love Monty to death, and there's a few things he was shocked that I didn't rip him on. Life of Agony, but his track record is obviously phenomenal, and
for balance. At the end of the Roadrunner Live DVD, there's a bit where everyone says "fuck Monty Connor" to the Roots Bloody Roots riff. So just go straight to that, and that's balanced. Yeah, we're not being too nice to him now.
Yes, exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about grunge rock, because
yes,
for me, being academically minded, that sounds like I'm blowing smoke up my own ass, but you'll find out why I said that. I'm interested in the potential there, the delivery of it, and then the lawsuit. That's the academic bit. I'm really interested in the bankruptcy side. It's a question for Ray, it's a question for Marcus, but it is so intriguing how this is where Roadrunner is impactful in a legal sense, because they had to set a new precedent in bankruptcy law to resolve the grunge truck problem.
And I actually am not that knowledgeable of all that. I mean, again, it is at that point, there was so much of my knowledge came from what I absorbed in. In other words, I was the metal radio guy that was then evolving into a commercial radio guy. I was not privy to a lot of the legal stuff.
Oh, sure. There's stuff from the start then. So you must have had to upskill into the grunge world to be able to go, okay, this is a point of innovation for the label. And were you asked to get behind it? And did you say yes?
Okay, so my evolution into commercial radio was, and I don't remember if we had talked about this at all last time, but it was interesting. Again, I was this idealistic little metal shit, whose dream was pure. I was a purist, no question about it. At the time, I was like, if I could spend the rest of my life waving the banner for metal, I will be the happiest guy in the world. Mm-hmm. And there's so much of that metal idiocy that you see in the world of the sellout stuff and all that stupidity that hinders the genre. But so there was a point where Case and Doug took me out to lunch one day, mm-hmm. and explained to me how we needed to, as a label, step into this commercial radio world, and that they were looking to me to do that. I did say no. I was like, no, man, that's it. That's not me, man. No. But the point is luckily, and again, this is one of the many wonderful moments that I've had with Case, and it's funny. There are things that he probably wouldn't remember this in a million years, but it's one of those pivotal moments in my life. I still, this many decades later, can remember that lunch when he looked at me and said something very much along the lines of, you're meant for so much more than this. He's like, this is great. You're doing this great stuff as Psycho. He goes, you're the best metal radio promo guy out there. He's like, but you should be the best radio promo guy out there, and he, he had that faith in me, and look, it wasn't that hard of a sell. He wasn't looking to try and steal me from a company. He was trying to give me expansion. Again,
make you realize your own potential, all that kind of stuff. He was developing you.
Absolutely, 1,000%. So luckily, of course, I listened to the man. And then the thing is poor grunge rock. Here's the thing, and I love that band. And when I say poor grunge rock, this is what they were forced to go through. You're talking about the Seattle grunge explosion, Nirvana, Soundgarden, Screaming Trees, Alice in Chains, all these bands, and they're a community in Seattle. All these bands are exploding. And here, I mean, we're talking on an unprecedented scale, some of these bands, again, look at the bands I just mentioned. Nirvana changed the world. Soundgarden, the best of the Seattle bands. I don't care what anyone says. I stand by that. Alice in Chains, brilliance, huge, multi-platinum. So here comes Grunge Truck, who want a piece of that. And now they're on this independent label who, with this brand new promo guy who's trying his damnedest, and had he absolutely my top priority and my focus, and we were definitely having success, but we were not prepared yet. Our whole system was growing, and so they weren't able to benefit from a big machine already in place. And so I think that was where a lot of their frustration came in, of course.
You got to think about the timescales here as well. This is 91. This isn't a reactive signing. This is a proactive signing.
Right. It really, we were not behind the curve. It was right. This is in the thick of things. So they're seeing all this stuff happening, and they're like, oh, great, we want this too. Well, we should have this too. And, they're not, look, were they as good as Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, and Nirvana? I don't know about that, but they were a great band. And they certainly, it's like, it's not regrets. And I'm bummed for them. It was wonderful for us.
Yeah.
And it was great. I mean, I still love the band, and feel bad for those that are no longer with us. But they definitely wanted more than we were able to, I think, deliver at the time.
Okay.
And it's because it wasn't just a successful trend. You're talking about one of those major musical shifts in history. The grunge movement was one of those major musical shifts.
Yep.
And it was like, so those that didn't get the success, they felt it.
Yeah, and slipped through the cracks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I need to ask more questions about things that I just have no clue about, because normally I try and do research and I try and hit the beats and try and expand on the beats. But Grunge Truck, I just know they're a good grunge band. They existed, then they didn't exist. And then there was some legal precedent, which is my wheelhouse, which I'm interested in. And you touched on something which was quite interesting as well, which was Roadrunner wasn't necessarily mobilized infrastructurally to deal with something that big. When I was speaking to Marcus, his contention was, let me just try and organize my thoughts and the personnel involved. It starts with 93 to 95, which is obviously, as we discussed at length, the typo campaign. The goal happens and there's a lot of credibility, and there's a lot of drive, again, still in that emergo sort of that conventional contemporary rock space. And as such, there is a requirement for the label to mobilize infrastructurally on a much bigger scale, because now they are a gold RIAA certified body and vehicle. Two personnel are introduced, Coast to Phrase and Derek Shulman. I think I'm right in saying Coast and Derek were sort of 95 through to 2001, around about then, in and thereabouts. Did you feel that expansion and that mobilization? Did you feel that there was now an agenda to make things bigger than they already were?
Well, there's no question. It was a very exciting growth that happened over a course of a few years. I mean, I can also, for as much as we just talked about the whole Grunge Truck thing, Grunge Truck and that whole thing were a tremendous help for what did come afterwards, which was the typo thing.
Right.
Because now I'm in that world. And I'm trying to think if there was anything else that I had taken. It really wasn't. Grunge Truck was it, and it literally went from Grunge Truck into typo. And so I had opened doors with Grunge Truck. And I don't want it to come across like I was using Grunge Truck for typo.
Sure.
Obviously not true.
Can I make an analogy that might help you?
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Blue Mountain opened the door for Nickelback in a contemporary way, in a similar kind of way.
Absolutely, no
It
question about
breaks the mold in which you inhabit later.
Right.
Sorry, carry on.
But it also, and it put me in that world, you know, and which was, and it was interesting because, you know, I had to, again, you have this crazy long-haired metalhead going by the name of Psycho, who was calling these mainstream programmers, as the name Psycho from Roadrunner.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, it was kind of like, what the, these guys who are not used to this, you know, I was my own little version of like, what the hell is, and then I was, and so I think had I come to them first with Type O, it's like, so I was able to open the doors and deal with these mainstream radio contemporaries, whether they be the programmers, the radio independents, stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
with this. And then the Type O thing, which again was a 2-year-long huge campaign. And so, and with great payoff, not just in the fact that it was our first gold record, but it was in everything. You're right, credibility and money, and establishing us in every department. We were now bigger, more successful.
Yeah.
And so, right, and again, remember, we were always trying to be bigger. And so there was always an attempt to bring in players into the team that were going to raise the bar. And yes, you can definitely see that you start to get to around 94, 95, we were definitely, I mean, look, it was like, look, success breeds success. You start getting that, you have to grow, and you have to keep it going, and you have to continue this stuff, and you have to bring in the bigger name players while you're hot to keep that snowball going down the hill.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. So yes, you definitely felt it wasn't even a pressure to succeed, although of course there was, but also the excitement to succeed. We were, all of us, like, oh my God, we're getting bigger, because everyone wanted it. I mean, everyone wanted to be bigger. None of us were there going, ooh, I'm so excited to keep us as 7 people in a room. No, everyone wanted to be big, no question.
How do you creep the scope out then? Do you just find yourself with more of a budget to promote with, or do you find yourself with, is it simply that, or is there now like a network which you previously did not have a connection with which you now can take advantage of? Is that what an expansion looks like in the record industry in mid-90s?
Well, yes, you certainly, right. You are allowed to play with bigger players.
Okay.
You know, when you're the little kid, you get to play with the little kids. You're at the kids' table. And so as you grow and you get more success and more credibility, and people believe that you can deliver, because a big part of it is this is big business. And so people want to, you know, the larger entities, for me, for example, the bigger radio stations, for the sales department, the bigger sales contacts, you know, for the press department, the bigger magazines, they want to know that they're backing something that is going to bring them good business. It's all, you know, it's like, no one wants to be like, you know, it's all well and good to be like, dude, Rolling Stone magazine should put the Unsigned band on the cover because that would be cool cred. Yeah, but that doesn't sell magazines. You know, I could sit there and say the big rock radio station in New York or LA should add the Unsigned band into regular rotation because that would be cool. It's not good business. So they want to know that they're getting in bed with a good business partner, and you're allowed to now play in that bigger world because of your success. So that's why Type O really were so important to us, because it established us as a successful entity. And it was with such a cool, unique band too. I think that's what was so important. Another thing that was so important was that we didn't just get lucky with, let's just say that it was Grunt Truck, and we all of a sudden had our big grunge band. Well, that would be great, fantastic, and it would absolutely have changed us, and it would be wonderful, and not a negative thing to be said. But we also would be another successful grunge band. Whereas instead, we really established ourselves with something that was unlike anything else out there. So that really makes a statement where it was like, what the hell are these guys at Roadrunner doing?
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually.
We really did continue to try and kind of, mess with things, I mean, there was a point where, when I took Sepultura's Rada Mahata to commercial radio. You're talking about, one of the largest metal bands in the world with a Portuguese rhythmic tribal sounding song. It was like, and we didn't get a lot of success, but we did get some. But again, it was like, what the hell are these guys doing? And it was like we were marching to our own beat. And that's what was so damn cool. We were marching to our own beat. And
it's trend setting.
Yeah. And I think that's where you start to see the nickel backlash. And again, and I support those guys to my last breath. Absolutely. They are some of the nicest, hardest working guys whose only crime was that they succeeded. That's it. And so, but they were guilty of being a more standard sounding rock band versus something completely left field. It's like, so they were guilty of not being bizarre. You know what I'm saying?
I think it was at a time where bizarre was very much in vogue. Yeah. The only thing that wasn't bizarre was 9 Lives by Aerosmith, which is a fucking killer album, but it just set the tone of, all right, there's a zeitgeist here of legacy acts who occupy the common ground of what we understand to be contemporary rock and roll. And then Nickelback came and said, actually, no, we can modernize this sound. And it tread the line right in between the extremes of nu metal and the extremes of like maybe a slightly scattered extreme metal scene. But I do agree. I think their only trying was being successful, but we can unpack that. I did want to ask a couple more 90s things, and I want to jump into the 2000s with both feet. Did you catch up on the Apple Knockers Flophouse stuff?
I read that story that you sent me. Absolutely. I did not get a chance to dive too much deeper, but God, that's wonderful. I love it. That's so Case too.
Yeah, he understands the value of making a splash. And in a similar capacity, we have certain controversies in the road. I'll say controversies. Oh man, that's a shit word. It's almost a dirty word in the context of how I'm trying to build it up. Basically, shit happened which the label lead into really nicely. Playgirl, Glenn Benton shooting squirrels, shit like that. Did you guys lean into it? And was there anything else that I've missed that might not be quite as legendary as those examples, which were used to the label and the brand's advantage?
We absolutely would. We had no fear of leaning into stuff like that. I mean, look, the Playgirl thing, look, that was a great opportunity. And I think that Peter had some regrets on that to the end of his days. But, he definitely, look, Peter absolutely loved to, the band. I mean, it wasn't just Peter. I mean, in my dealings with the guys still to this day, they still want to do certain things that, offend people. And it's my responsibility to try and stop them, much to their dismay. But because Peter would go on Jerry Springer and stuff like that. And then, Glenn Benton, oh my God, Glenn was perfect. I mean, you're talking about a guy, I mean, you're looking for those personalities. Everything from the shooting squirrels, the branding the upside down cross in his forehead. And he also had an incredible talent for saying things that would offend and get the press, and it was great. And it helped the DSI thing, and of course we fueled into that. We talked last time about the Brujeria thing. I mean, that whole thing was at first was a lean into controversy. I mean, it was like the album cover was, not carryable in certain stores, in a lot of stores. And again, we tried to sell the storyline that poor Monty was kidnapped with a bag over his head and forced to do the deal because they were, I mean, like, you weren't allowed to say who was in the band. They were Mexican banditos, not a bunch of metal real name guys making a side project. So yeah, look, there's no question. Controversy, hell yeah, absolutely. You had the fine line though of like, we wanted to do this stuff, but you never wanted to do anything that would hurt the label. It was a delicate dance.
This is the thing. Did it ever blow up in your face in that sense? Or have you been lucky for 30 years?
I'd say lucky, because nothing ever hurt us. Not that I can think of. And if it did, then obviously it wasn't enough to leave a lasting memory for me. It's like there was always times where people would get offended, and but that's good. I mean, It's controversy is good. But yeah, there was nothing that ever really scarred us. Nothing that ever hurt us.
Who got Great Cat on Morton Downey? Whose idea was that?
The Great Cat. That's one of the few acts that, a good chunk of her history does predate me, and I was there for part of it. At the time, I was just this metal radio intern / part-timer, but that would have been the press department, because that's who does the TV stuff. She was, still is, she's still going. God bless her. She's still doing her Great Cat thing.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and good for her. And good for her.
Yeah, absolutely. She's great.
All right, let's dive in feet first to the stuff I know about, but I feel like everything's so well recorded that I'm at risk of just retreading shit that everyone already knows. And that's the fear. And that's just the risk I'm going to carry. And I'm very happy making myself look like a knobhead on this podcast, as I have done for the last, nearly 80 hours doing it. So that's fine. So we got off last time on that. It was like an 18-month period. Subside Up and Slipknot, Mania, all that stuff happened. Universal stuff happened in that 2-year period. Was it anticipated? Was there a bubbling at in the 98 times where it was like, we've got a few things, we're looking around at a few things and something's going to blow up? Or was it completely no idea this was going to happen? Let's start with Slipknot, because
right. It's funny. There was what's interesting is there's a brief period that I, of course, did miss because I had left for 3 years.
What year did you come back? Sorry.
Well, okay. I came back would have been because I came back to set up the first single, Leader of Men, for Nickelback. So I worked the entirety of them. So
first single off the reissue, because I think the first time it came out was 98, was it?
I believe it was 97 I came back.
Let's
hang on. Well, no, look, when we put it out, I mean,
this is what I mean. Yeah,
you're right. It did come out in Canada, but not in the US.
September 99.
Right. Exactly. I was going to say
perfect.
So I came back where Slipknot had started.
Yes.
And we're still, in the early exciting phase, but still we're young, and Nickelback So it's to say the lead up to those. You know, it's funny because I had left and I had worked at, it was the Enclave, working for Tom Zutat, and then working for TVT, working with Seven Dust and Steve Gottlieb, which is a whole other insanity. And I remember the Nickelback demos were floating around, and we had gotten it at the TVT offices, and I heard it, and I remember going, God, this is a great band like Bush.
Yeah, you were saying.
Yeah. And so I wound up going back over to Roto to work for Dave Lonko, as we had talked about. Now, so to say, you know, was it expected? Well, there was definitely an excitement. I can't tell you what it was like with the signing of Slipknot, but it certainly would have been, there would have been a lot of expectation, a lot of excitement because of this unique band. You know, there's the two different successes. You know, Slipknot were certainly, I mean, that is the quintessential extreme Roadrunner success. To take this metal band, this extreme metal band, and to break it wide open. I mean, that's the ultimate version of what Roadrunner was doing in those early years. Like I said, that's the payoff to all that other stuff. There was a vision of that was what Sepultura probably would have been, versus, you know, I mean, this was, but the Ozfest tour really was like, I mean, that's so well documented. You know, that slot on the Ozfest tour was so pivotal in the early days of Slipknot. And so a big part of what Roadrunner would do and what we would do, and like, for example, what I tried to do with Sepultura, was we would take these existing real stories out there in the real world, sales stories, you know, like these bands are doing well and we don't need your mainstream stuff, except now we want your mainstream stuff. We were forcing our way into the mainstream world by the strength of our, you know, sales and fan base numbers. Yeah. So Slipknot, quite obviously, they got on that tour and it was like the world just went, holy shit, what the hell? And because they're Slipknot. And so that allowed that to go, and that was certainly extremely exciting. You know, the Nickelback thing was a lot more, I think the expectation you're talking about was a lot heavier on Nickelback because it was Dave Lonko was brought in to take us to next level at commercial radio. He was brought in, and they had always been trying to bring in the right big game player for rock radio and there was a number of swing and a misses, which is what led to me leaving, because they kept on bringing people in to be above me that were misfires. And the first good one they brought in was while I was gone, which is Dave Lonko. And I had interviewed for him while he was at RCA. And so I had wanted to work for him when Joe Guzik was looking to leave, who was a friend of mine. We talked about some of this last time. So I then came back. But the point is so there was always an expectation that Dave was going to bring us to the next level, and Dave was putting it all on Nickelback. You know, Dave was like, this is the band that we are going to break this label with. So then that was we'd spent 2 years working the State, not Silver Side Up. Obviously that set up Silver Side Up. And we still didn't break through. I mean, we spent an exorbitant amount of money to sell like 200,000 records, working 3 singles. But like I was saying, with Grunt Truck opening the door and setting the playing field for what came next, same thing. Everything we did with the State set us up for.
And this is the thing, and you mentioned this last week about, just to close the door on Slipknot on this on this analysis. No disrespect to anyone, but Slipknot was always going to happen on their own terms, and that's what happened on those first 1999. It was always going to be a thing. So they did a lot of that work in a weird way, and that's why it was exploded in the way that it did, because they were a firecracker. And maybe it's a question for Monty as to how Roadrunner captured that. And I have bought some books, but I did no fucking time to read them. But Nickelback is a different story because, as you said, there was an expectation because there was a design to go into commercial radio, and that's what Dave Lonco was all about. Secondarily, Nickelback knew it as well, because they've even got their own label and they're pushing things on their own terms in Canada because they knew that they were working full time to achieve the same result. That's a different story altogether, isn't it? It's a different modus operandi. And even rock bands, never mind metal bands.
Look, Nickelback and Slipknot are two dramatically different stories, 100%. And you're right. And it was so exciting to have these vastly different stories together. You know, I understand what you're saying about how Slipknot was going to happen regardless. And without trying to insult any of my Roadrunner family members, to a huge degree, you're right. Mm-hmm. Slipknot are a force to be reckoned with. They were they were Slipknot. They still are. But
I am paraphrasing, of course, for the purposes of everyone else.
So now, that is not to remove any of the insane amounts of hard work that we all did, because obviously they did need a good support team. Mm-hmm. And we did a lot of work. And so again, I don't think that anyone could look though and see that the explosion of out there in the street that happened when the world saw them. Look, we rode that and we fueled that and we took it and we grew it. But you're right, Slipknot was going to come out and make an explosion. And it was just a matter of who was going to be the one, and were they going to effectively take it to the next level. Nickelback was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, because now you're talking about something, like I said, they were not bizarre. They were not different. Now, they had someone in Chad Kruger, again, not discounting the other guys, but Chad, of course, is the guy. He's incredibly ambitious. He is a smart businessman. Sometimes he puts his foot in his mouth, but whatever. The point is you definitely, you're right. He and some of his business partners that he had a vision from day one. And you have, again, people want to rip on the guy. I respect him to no end because he's a combination of a smart businessman with great ambition and a great songwriter. You know what? Don't like him, I don't care. That guy is an amazing songwriter. And again, people like to go out there and look, everyone knows about the Nickelback thing. Yep. I say it again and again. I defend them to my last breath.
I'm going to let's disregard backlash as in the content of the backlash. We'll talk about backlash as an entity, but as I've grown older and cynical in the internet age, I've realized that 99% of all words that are espoused on the internet, written or otherwise, are of low value dialogue. So we could go into the ifs and whys of why Nickelback received such backlash. That's a different documentary. That's a different thing. So let's shove a cork up its ass now, and we'll talk about the actual fact of the matter, which is 10 times platinum and diamond, which is fucking ridiculous. But the sort of thing has left me with a question, just meditating on it while you said it. The train was going with Slipknot. The train was going. So the question I've got, and this is not for you, this is for anyone in that world. It may be a Corey Brennan question. It's probably a Monty question, which is why Roadrunner? And it's probably down to that conversations you'd have with Joey Jordison saying they understand the legacy and they understand what it was about. Again, that's just a guess. But that's, given that we've now got two completely separate stories at the absolute climax of this wider tale of the label, I feel like now the fork's in the road there, and that's where I'm going to go with Slipknot. The question is why. And with Nickelback, as you've said there, it's a different tale. It's been built up. It's been designed in a way because we're wanting to be a conventional commercial radio arm, I guess. So again, maybe more. I've got other questions around the negotiations with, was it 609 Studios, whatever Chad's label was, and the intricacies of how they managed to dangle the carrot in front of there. But let's go into what we were just talking about, which is expectation versus reality and backlash as a brand obstacle. Because up to this point, backlash has probably managed through controversy, right?
Here's the thing is, and I see where you're going on this is, first of all, side note is I always find it humorous, some of the stuff you touched on there. Island did the deal for Slipknot and didn't, they wanted Slipknot because that was the big thing. And Nickelback was kind of like, oh, by the way, look at, surprise. It's with Slipknot, what happened is, look, I mean, and I know this has been talked about, there was a radio, we have, in the radio department, there'll be one guy who would oversee the department, and then there would be regionals, guys who would handle the territories, underneath the main guy. That's the setup of the department. And so we had a regional named John Kuliak, who was in the Midwest, who had brought the I think it was Spit It Out or whatever was the demo to Monty. So and again, and I actually wasn't there at the time. That was when Joe was sitting in my seat. And so that's how Monty got in there. And my guess is the negotiations probably were pretty comfortable in that, first off, think about this. These big machines were not like, they weren't looking for something like Slipknot.
No.
They're no way. So now you're talking about, a limited number of labels that would have been looking for a band like Slipknot. And now you're talking about a guy like Monty, who obviously lives and breathes and can, not only talk the talk, but has, walked in front of everyone walking the walk. So, you're a guy who comes in with this legacy of his own history to sit and talk to the guys. And so now, and you're talking about a label that has a level of success. Like I said, when you look at the labels that could have been Roadrunner, Metal Blade, Century Media, Earache, Noise, it's like, look at the ones, so we really were, we were the big dog in that world.
When you think about it, that is the list, isn't it?
Yeah. There are others, but that's the list. I mean, listen, I could sit here and now, Peaceville, it's like, there are a few others,
yes,
no question about it, but right. Megaforce, but it was Roadrunner. So Monty was probably with passion able to close that deal with, I'm guessing, relatively few hurdles in the grand scheme of things. I don't know if there were any issues, but they obviously worked it out, and it was the right guy. I mean, what you got with so many of these bands that we signed was we were where they always dreamed of being anyway. So then it was a matter of working out the negotiations. It's like, that's how it happened, in that the radio guy who got word from probably the radio station in Des Moines, hey, check out this band, there's something happening here, because that happens all the time. Us radio guys were constantly been having stuff thrown at us, and 8 times out of 10 it was nothing, but sometimes you would have this gem sent your way, and so we would send it in, and so that's what happened. And then I mean, it's certainly, you know, we believe that they were going to be, look, you believe in something special, you believe something's good,
Mm.
and, you know, you can see, okay, this one is going to be big
Yeah.
because every record comes out with different levels. Like, okay, this is going to be good, and we think it's going to sell 50,000, 100,000. We think this one's going to be huge. So then you spend accordingly based on your expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So Slipknot certainly had big expectations.
Yeah. Yeah. Where was I going with Nickelback? Yeah.
Oh, the backlash thing. You know,
Yeah.
the
So
backlash thing. You know, there was none for the longest time. You
yeah.
know, you have to. Okay, now it's this thing that you can't not talk about.
Mm.
They were one of the biggest bands on the planet. There was no. I mean, the backlash was only with the metal core of the Roadrunner base,
Mm.
but that's not the mainstream success world, obviously.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, you talk about, I mean, it's like Nickelback, they were, it was massive, and
Yeah.
there was nothing but love and success, and it was everywhere. Everything we did with Nickelback, we were one of those records that things shifted around for. You know, there are records that are so big that things moved because we were going to do something.
Yeah. Tell me about that then, because promo isn't just volume, it's strategy as well. So how do you go about Platinum Records in that sense?
It's, you know, obviously there's once Silver Side Up explodes, and you now have, I mean, How You Remind Me was not just a hit. It was like a ridiculous hit. It was the kind of hit that, you know, doesn't happen every year. It wasn't just a success story. It was an oh my god success story.
Yeah.
And then of course we had the follow-up singles. And so the things, and now after that, so now of course the pressure is massive on the band to deliver. And it was like, so they'd go do their record. They would, I mean, and then of course, then there's, I mean, singles choices are now happening in, you know, deep dark rooms. And it was like, and things are now handled under lock and key because, you know, this is still at a time when things leaking could be a huge problem. You know, it's funny.
Oh, wow.
We're in a whole different world. Oh yeah. Well, we're in a different world now. This digital world we're in, it's like, where honestly, first off, everything is going to leak at some point, but it's also because everything is about streaming and stuff and not about how, if it gets out and leaks, it could hurt your sales numbers. And again, this is well-known stuff in the music business, you know, where it's like, because everyone had to buy it to get it. And so if it leaked and, you know, people could get it for free, then it could hurt your numbers. So everything was handled, things are handled under lock and key. And when we would drop a single, it was, I mean, again, there are some songs that when they get dropped to radio, everything else has to react to that. Because, for example, because radio stations, these are known as event records. And everything, it's like they're gonna, you know, throw this thing on the air the minute they get it, because it's like, oh my god, we got to premiere this thing, and it's gonna all get played the shit out of for the entire, like, it's everything massive.
Once you get to a certain weight, I'm going to use the word weight.
Yes.
Exclusivity from other third parties and other interested parties matters a lot more.
Yes.
And that's an information dissemination that needs controlling.
Everyone wants to get their exclusive things, and you can't do exclusives because you're going to piss off partners. It's a much more delicate political dance, and so you learn how to. I mean, this was a great growth process for every one of us, because it was, you know, you learned politics on a whole new level now. Being able to, because you couldn't return exclusive favors to those who'd been there from the beginning as much as you wanted to.
Yeah.
You know, as much as you want to be like, you were there from day one, so you get presents, you get exclusive. You can't do that so much anymore.
Zane Lowe's got it today. Yeah.
Right. You have to find other ways to repay those who were there from day one, but you get to a point where you need everybody. You need everyone across the board. And so it's right. It's huge. And so, and look, and Chad would occasionally stick his foot in his mouth because sometimes he would, you know, look, he's a small town guy from Hannah, Alberta, who doesn't stick their foot in their mouth. The problem is when you or I stick our foot in our mouth, it doesn't get spread. They also, I think, you talk about where the backlash came. So now you're talking years later, after we've now become so big. And, you know, and sometimes when things get so big, you see some of that. But the difference, for example, between, say, Creed, although there are big differences, because Scott Stapp had a history of bad behavior that Chad didn't have. But the thing is the difference, for example, is internet and social media. It now becomes easier to spread this. It becomes a cool thing. The abuse goes viral.
Yeah.
And so that's something that, for example, that Creed didn't have. You know, everyone made fun of Creed and everything, but it took longer. And so it took hold slower. Whereas as social media grew, it became a really, really cool thing, because as we all know, the internet is built on abuse. Every comment that ever gets said is either a diehard fan saying it's the greatest thing in the world, or, you know, or someone, more than likely there's trolls trying to rip things apart.
I like the politically agnostic term of mostly worthless dialogue.
Absolutely, it is. Social media is toxic, and Nickelback were victims of that. It became they became the cool one to abuse. They became the punchline, and it fueled itself and took on a life of its own.
How did that impact the perception of the label? Because remember that social media is a new thing. It's a new information stream. Did some people buy into the backlash and go, what we're doing? Or, for example, Case, who's probably not a prominent internet user, did he think, shit, is this band that we've been sponsoring for the last 5 or 6 years, is this actually a shit band? Or was everyone just like, no, this is just white noise in the background of general pop culture?
You know what? It's you know the old joke, oh, that band sells out, or that band sold out. Yep, every night. It's like, here's the thing. We didn't care. I mean, we cared, but we didn't care. Meaning, it's like they were laughing their way to the bank. I mean, maybe they weren't laughing because, I mean, obviously they're human beings and they're good guys with real feelings.
Yeah.
But the point is, but at the same time, they were selling out every night in arenas across America. They were selling, again, plaques on walls, you know, for every single release they put out. You know, it's like, look, while Chad's being put on cribs because of his insane house, it's like, is he really worried about what some trolls are saying on the internet? Maybe when he's in the privacy of his own home, he's upset. But at the end of the day, life was treating them really, really well.
Let's look at the more... let's look at the knock-on effect for Roadrunner, because platinum equals good. There's one thing I want to touch on first. It's kind of a sidestep. I think I can't remember who, it might have been Harry Abrams. Someone told me that Case's ambition, his life's goal with Roadrunner was to achieve a platinum record in the United States. Was that, what, do you understand that to be his goal at the time as well? I'm not just like as a generic, this is a measure of success, but Case's like, that's the thing I want. when he achieved that, I want to find out if once he achieved that, was he then looking at retirement afterwards? Obviously he didn't, but was it?
No, that was the goal to that point. And then there was more,
Right.
then there was bigger goals. It was like, look, there's no question. First you want a gold record. We got it with Typo. Then you want a platinum record. We got that with Slipknot. And then we got that with Typo. It was like, okay, well now it's like you want bigger. No question. He was, there's no, I don't know that he has that whole desire to retire thing. I don't know that he wants to sit around reading books and, having coffee. Even now, at this very moment, I don't think he is looking at retirement. Some people are like that. My dad's like that too. It's like retirement is one step closer to death. Some people just, they work. And that's not an insult. God bless them. I mean, I don't know whether I'm going to get to that point. You get to a point of sitting around, you want to kill yourself because you're sitting there, you're bored out of your mind. Some people are like, so I think that's the case. I don't think if he ever thought retirement, it was probably a bad dream.
Point being, even though it was subjective, it wasn't an indicator of the end of the road of that particular path in any particular way. And we know that anyway because he was still with it. But, I'm just wondering if there was some sort of dialogue around it, but it doesn't matter. But the knock-on effect to Nickelback, my expectation, and I'm trying to choose my words carefully, is that the demographic that was buying Roadrunner records as products changed exponentially, foundationally with Nickelback. It's no longer fringe music in the sense. We are now looking at a more mainstream market. We're probably now looking, I think women for a start. I bet that as a demographic, we're seeing the numbers climb there. I don't think there were as many women buying, say, extreme metal records. Was that true? Did Nickelback bring in more people to the party?
Well, certainly, yes. I mean, we were selling numbers between Slipknot and Nickelback. Obviously, we were selling, crazy numbers, which is great. And that brought us more, and there was more bands that were like, I mean, obviously Nickelback brought us Theory of a Dead Man and, stuff like that. But look, there's no question that you're at a point where, look, how many people used to say, I would buy it just because it had that logo. If it had that logo, I knew it was going to be good. Well, we grew, and so you lose some of that. And as a business, then that's certainly an acceptable thing. Obviously, we're selling a lot more, than we ever were. So money, I mean, look, we were bigger. Obviously, we were growing exponentially. We were getting these big partners. And so there's all this success. So there's no one inside who was thinking anything other than, oh my God, this is awesome. I mean, we were still Roadrunner, and it's like, it wasn't like, it was Nickelback, which is a rock band. At our core, we were guitar, bass, drums, vocals. It's like, we were a metal label who evolved into a bigger rock label, but it's not like we weren't a pop label. The pop success we had was with rock bands.
Yeah.
We weren't signing Cardi B. It was like we were still so everyone inside was ecstatic because we wanted success. Again, no one wanted us to stay. No one was. We wouldn't have hired anyone at the time who didn't want to be bigger.
Yeah.
And we were still bringing in. You start talking about, I mean, when you look at some of we're still bringing in bands like, at what point Killswitch Engage comes along, there's another, plaques on wall band. Trivium, it's interesting, I thought about it because I saw the shirt and it's funny. I think that they were one of the ones, I felt bad for them for a minute. because, and I don't remember who started it, but it wasn't the radio department. They were, because obviously, look, I love Trivium. I love them as people. I love them as a band, flat out. Something unfair was done to them because of the expectations, which is we put out that first record and someone inside tagged them as they're the next Metallica. There is no next Metallica. You don't put that on, especially on a baby band. Say, oh, they're going to be the next band that's going to change the face of music on this earth, because that's what Metallica did. You know, they were one of those bands that literally changed the face of music on this planet for guitar-based music. They're that big. So, and then you do that to these young kids. So now you're fueling these young egos, and it gave them a stumble, you know, because first off, again, people now are saying, oh, you know, these guys are such, you know, egotistical. No, it was a marketing thing. It wasn't Matt Heafy saying, I'm going, and then of course he had confidence, he still does. And so he has lots of confidence. Good. I want my rock stars to have confidence. But he wasn't out there saying, I'm going, I mean, he's certainly a Metallica fan. Who wasn't? Metallica changed my life too. I'm glad he was a Metallica fan. Thank you. But and that gave them a stumble. And luckily, look, I've loved watching the Trivium story. I've always, because I love how they evolve. And I wish they have succeeded to this point on a bigger level, because Matt certainly has, well, all of them, but they certainly want things like plaques on walls. But obviously they're succeeding on their own terms, and you know, Matt's doing all this awesome stuff. You know, he's doing great in all sorts of factors in his life.
I find that as a through line, as you've just sort of narrated it, I find that really difficult to reconcile, because the UK experience with Trivium has always been god tier, always. It's ridiculous. I mean, even with the Crusade, I think that's with the stumbling that you might have been referring to, the Crusade, where they went into a more thrashy direction and they dropped the screaming. Even I was like, this is unorthodox, but I'm all for it. I guess I was exactly the right age, though, because I was playing guitar and I didn't mind moving up to standard to learn those songs. I didn't mind trying to find some accessible singing because I couldn't scream, but I was a massive Ascendancy fan. One thing that needs to be done, someone needs to do a retrospective on the Crusade, down tune it and scream on it and see what it sounds like with like an Ascendancy sort of rig. But yeah, it's, if you talk to
I don't think that Trivium have put out a bad record.
No, absolutely not.
I think so I think there are records that I like more than others, but I literally think they have not put out a bad record yet. There are other bands, I don't think you can say that about Machine Head, but you can say that about Trivium. And that's okay. We're talking about opinions here, but there are Machine Head records, for example, and I respect anyone for trying to do different stuff. So it's, I mean, look, this is the older, wiser guy here. It's like, you know, I want my bands to try new things, and there are going to be swings and misses. But my point is Trivium are great. They're still putting out great, exciting records. They're still trying different things every single time, and I'm looking forward to the next record already. You know,
I wonder if, because this is something about Matt Heafy, again, I don't fucking know the dude, but it's what we were talking about earlier in terms of trend setting and being slightly ahead of the curve. Understanding the personalities, the A&R part of this is understanding the personalities that do that and getting them on your team. And I wonder if that's what Monty saw in those early days, especially around like Ember to Inferno. Did he spot, okay, this is a band that's going to constantly be ahead a little bit and is constantly going to do their own thing? I mean, you can't anticipate the Twitch thing. You can't anticipate the trailblazing in that sense, but you can find the personalities, and that's a large part of it, I think. But
it's as an A&R guy, you have to find not only the talent, and you're looking for, are they good songwriters? Are they a good live band?
Yeah.
And do they have the personality? Because you need a personality to attract people. You know, that's fact. I mean, if you've got, if your front man can't appeal to people, then it's not going to work. That's just it. I mean, your front man needs to be, needs to have an attraction for whatever it is. And so obviously whatever it was that was the right combination that he saw at the time, great. I mean, he obviously Trivium are very talented. Obviously they are good songwriters. Obviously they're a really good metal band. And he obviously, and Monty had an eye, still does, but I mean, at the time, certainly he was, he had an eye, and he saw him. And I'm glad, and Matt and I have talked over the years, about, what happened. I mean, he had to go through a growth phase that most people get to go through without, a spotlight.
Yes.
He had to go through that under a spotlight, and he's certainly, I mean, those rough days are so long gone. I mean, he's, and he learned a lot from him, and he became a far better businessman, frontman, personality. He became so much better at so much that, because of that early, hazing period.
Yeah.
And you're right. You are absolutely right. You're in a different territory because, I mean, look, there's no question, there are bands on Roadrunner that, I could tell you about bands that are even much smaller on Roadrunner in the US that play huge venues like a Blackstone Cherry. So there's definitely, it's a different territories, but and now Matt's obviously doing his thing, and it's great. I mean, he is certainly smart enough to be finding all these new ways of supporting himself and growing the brand.
The story of Matt's innovation, and it's almost personal for me. It's almost personal because I think we're the same age, and I think there are certain like growth spurts which I relate to in my own professional sort of like capacity, in my own career, and my own vote. The way I sort of perceive myself as a person is informed by certain steps, and I see those steps having happened with him, and I'm like, this is so. I find it very interesting, and I think it's an age thing. But I digress. I had a really good point. I've forgotten it.
Oh, good. That's
it's a different. Yeah, I think the story of Matt's innovation. It happens in isolation of the label. And it happens in isolation because I think part of his output now, the step he had to go through was to understand who he's not accountable to, not who he is accountable to.
Well, I do think that he is very lucky to, part of the gift that Matt has of being on Roadrunner is that it's the kind of label that allowed him the time to grow, because again, he is the kind of guy that if given the time, because he continues to try different things. He also, he's had to go through all sorts of stuff, as he has evolved his vocal styles.
Yep.
He went through to a point where he was having throat issues, so he had to evolve himself. He got rid of the harsh vocals, then he was able to evolve that and bring it back. Well, there are so many labels that would have moved on while a band is going through all sorts of twists and turns like that. My guess, while I don't, and I'm certainly not there anymore, but I don't know that there's ever been even a question about continuing with Trivium, because they're just so ingrained in the label now. And I think that, he has been allowed to evolve, and which is great. And it's cool. And they certainly are very excited to allow him to keep on doing different things. I mean, I know I saw a recent post of his where they're working on the new record, and I think it's supposed to be they're going really heavy again, is according to something he posted. So let's see. I mean, that it's great. You know,
it's been an interesting arc because I think because I was like front row their first headlining gig after Ozfest 2005. So that was like a watershed moment for me, and I think it was a watershed moment for them, which is really cool. And as we go through the trajectory, I've sort of grown up, got a house, got a real job, all that sort of stuff. Last year, when What the Dead Men Say came out and lockdown kicked in, I am super nostalgic for that record. It's been out for like a year because it was an incredibly unique sort of experience, similar to when I was 16, front row of the cockpit. So now after this, I'm going to go for a run and listen to What the Dead Men Say because I get a weird feeling from it, like a really weird nostalgic feeling for it. And it's nice that bands can still do that. Really nice.
It's a great record. I mean, it really is. I'm excited for it. So.
Yeah, keep bringing it on. And we could get, you know what, man, we should definitely do like a part 3 of this where we just talk about like the developmental styles of particular artists. That's like a panel sort of conversation. But let's move into like some of the 2000s territory.
Sure.
So we try and set the scene because again, in both feet, trying to understand and trying to understand the brand and the company and the decisions they're making and how they're trying to interact with this new world. It's a new world, it's a digital world, and they're bigger. They've disrupted the status quo by having 9 Nut Jobs sell platinum records while knocking certain people off the charts that I can't remember. Then we enter because he's still doing things. This whole metalcore scene, this whole Killswitch and Trivium and Chimeria and Il Nino, this is still underground shit that's happening, even though Universal are sat above you with the platinum generating incentives. Was there ever a point from a business perspective where we have the commercial viability, but we're still doing the underground shit? Was there ever any question about that? Or was that always just like, nope, we'll go rocking in on Monday and we're leaving on a Friday and this is the shit that we do?
We didn't look at the heavy stuff as being as limited as the mainstream labels would have thought, because we had already broken through with weird stuff. I think that, look, you know what, my perspective is certainly biased and skewed, but I will say that a big part, and again, I go back to when your first big breakthrough is with something so unusual, like a Typo Negative, and then a Slipknot.
Yeah.
Your perception is that things are not impossible. It's like you can do it because you've done it. So, you know, Killswitch, for example, which from my perspective, I was a big part of getting them signed as well. I don't know exactly. I mean, I could still remember the day I was working late and Mike Gitter had, you know, who I was friends with forever. You know, I mean, I'd known Mike forever. And so he, you know, hey, called me back by his office. And it seemed to me, from my perspective, like he just wanted to play me this cool thing that he'd heard. And it was Temple from Within from the indie record. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. The next day I came in and I was talking with Dave Lonco, and I was like, man, Mike played me this thing last night. I'm like, it's got nothing to do with what we're doing here at commercial radio. I'm like, but man, it was so freaking cool. Like this band Killswitch Engage. He goes, oh, cool. He goes, and so he winds up, we're there. He goes, he calls up Mike from, you know, to his office. And, hey, come on by, play me this thing. He plays it for Dave. Dave's like, wow, this is really cool. And it's really well. And I'm watching this thing. So now it becomes this snowball effect. Now me, Dave, and Mike walk into Jonas's office, who's the president at the time for so many years. Remember, and Jonas was early days Roadrunner. You know, he was certainly a very successful president for us, but he was, when I got there, the 7 people in the room, he was one of those 7 people. You know, so So we're talking to old school Roadrunner. So he goes in now and he plays this thing for Jonas, and I swear, and I'm watching Mike. Again, this is my perspective, so he may tell a different story, but it was like, it looked to me like Mike's like, what's going on here? And because now Jonas has listened to this thing, goes like, well, can we get them? Are they available? And Mike gave his answer of, yeah, pretty sure we can. And at which point then, which leads to us signing Killswitch.
They signed to Ferret first, aren't they? Which is an imprint from someone in the office. I can't remember the chap's name. I'm sure it's
Paul Conroy. Yeah,
that's the what. That's it. Yes.
Which is great also. Paul's awesome. Love Paul.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is great. And the Killswitch are still to this day one of my favorite bands of all time. And that was a whole other interesting thing. I mean, look, that's a whole other story itself, where we signed this amazing, credible metalcore band who out of this Boston scene, and right as we're starting to get things going, of course, the singer leaves.
Of course. I have a hot take from a co-host of the other sort of angle of this podcast. Yeah. Have you heard of Funeral for a Friend?
I've heard of them. I've heard, but I've not. I can't say I'm.
No, that's fine then, because we've got this theory that because their first run of albums, it was with Sanctuary, with Raw Power, it was with Rod Smallwood's management. They were kind of regarded post-hardcore emo. But when you listen to those records and you listen to Killswitch, you're like, they've got more in common than they've got separate. So we've got this hot take where it's like, it was unfair that they weren't branded part of this metalcore movement, because they probably should have been anyway.
There was a scene coming out of the Northeast, and that's fine. I mean, which is great, and mm-hmm. it was exciting, and Killswitch certainly were, look, it's. If you ask me, they're the best of the bunch, but I'm biased. So
yeah.
And that was exciting. That was another one that we had obviously some tremendous success with Howard.
Yes.
Again, plaques on walls for a band like Killswitch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's. I want to ask about Roadrunner United. I didn't ask those in my question for some reason. It escapes my mind. I get so hung up on like Slipknot and Nickelback when I completely forget like my own staple from that year, which is that big year, 2005. Funnily enough, to tie some of this together, I was in Minnesota the day that came out, the week that came out, and I remember going to Best Buy, and I picked it up, bought it, thought this is interesting. I must have picked it up on Blabbermouth, so it was happening. Went to the Mall of America, sat down, had a sandwich, and Matt Heafy walks in with Travis Smith, and we both look at each other like this, and then we just sort of like courteous nod and move on, because I was like, that's too weird.
That is bizarre. That record is amazing. I mean, and obviously that was a Herculean project for Monty and for those four guys, the four team captains.
What were your initial thoughts when it happened? Because it's beyond a compilation to celebrate a label, isn't it? It's a complete different beast.
It was, like I said, it was inconceivable, because you're right, you're not talking about a compilation of the greatest. I have the 3-disc set somewhere which was simply the greatest hits thing. I mean, that's great. I'm glad I have it. Cool. It's also not even grabbing some of the big bands and have them do some covers. Now you're talking about something.
There's that, and then there's that.
Yeah. Inconceivable, because now, I mean, this literally to have these, again, the four captains with Dino and Rob and Matt and Joey. It was like, so Monty sitting there has to come up with who are going to be great enough songwriters to be the team captains, and then to together each song has its own different band, and each song is its own freshly written song. It's like, oh my, this is insane. And so and then the fact that the record's actually really good.
Yeah. It's mad, really, isn't
it? It's amazing. So that was always, I wanted that record to be huge because it deserved it. I wanted that record because Monty deserved it, because the label deserved it. It didn't become huge. I mean, again, that to me was like, that should have been a gold record because of What's Right. Legacy, that should have been a legacy plaque. And then the show, that show was amazing. I mean, that was my life on stage. I watched everyone get plastered. I didn't touch a drop to drink until after the show because I wanted to remember it all. It was
just,
I mean, that was
just
amazing.
to give you an idea of the legacy. So Rotary United has sold just shy of 100,000 in the US as of a few weeks ago.
Yeah, not enough. It
But
should be 5 times as much.
it should be, but it's still, those numbers aren't to be snuffed at. I mean, there's still plenty of records 15 that came out 15 years ago which haven't sold anything like that. But it was always interesting to see that it was being, as a consumer, as someone who was like, well, I'm just some fucking snot-nosed kid. It was interesting to see that the legacy was being taken seriously. Maybe that's what turned me onto the brand, because then I understood it was something special because it warranted such behavior. But yeah, it one thing that does sort of not irk me in any way, but surprises me that I haven't seen any discussion about it, was I would have expected Max to be one of the captains. Maybe even Pete. Again, it's a question for Monty to sort of go, how was it selected? But because at the end of the day, it's an incredibly diverse range of songwriters and styles, and maybe that was the game plan. But
I think it's interesting, and right, that's a Monty question. I could only speculate. Joey's easy to understand. Joey is a no-brainer. Rob is pretty easy to understand.
They all are when you think about it.
Yeah, no, I know. And Matt, he wanted someone new. He wanted, and he knew that Matt was
hungry.
Not just hungry. Yeah, yes, hungry, but he was he was talented more than his years. Like, in other words, he knew he had it in him.
Yeah.
And Dino, look, you're talking about Dino Cazares. It's like, so each of them makes sense. And so you go, well, he could have had like 5 captains or 6 captains. Well, it's like, you could allow this thing to snowball. And I guess, look, he made those choices, and I certainly, like I said, the record actually turned out beyond expectation, or beyond whatever it is, beyond the odds.
I do spin up shit and say, why not Max, why not Pete? But then you sort of think there's no right answer, but there's no wrong answer. But the answer is probably you've got to work within limitations, otherwise it could spiral out of control, and that's the thing, right? Was there anyone who never backed it? Anyone who thought this is a shit idea all the way until to conception?
I don't think so. I don't think that. Again, this is speculation. I don't think the Nickelback guys were included because that's off-brand.
That's a point.
Not an insult. And I think the thing with Peter, again, if I'm to sit here and think about it, I wonder if it's like, because Peter, as brilliant as he is, and quite obviously, we know me, but I wonder if his songwriting would have been a little his songwriting is so distinctly him and those guys. Like, I wonder if it would have gelled as well. Like, I think Typo needs to be Typo.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, you couldn't cross-pollinate it with other band members. It would all sound like a similar kind of thing. That's interesting. Yeah, I never thought of it that way.
Kenny and Johnny can absolutely, they can jam with anybody, which is great, or or with many people, so that's great. But when you start talking about the Peter Josh thing, and yes, both of them obviously were part of the project on different songs, but it's like, I think that, so I think it makes sense that Peter would be a part of it, but not a captain.
Yeah. I've got like 10 minutes before I need to shoot off.
All good.
tell me about the Twilight years and how the relationship with Roadrunner ended
For me,
for yourself. Yeah, like because we know Warner buys their majority stake in 2006, but they don't start clawing at the door until about 2009, 2010, right?
you know, it was interesting. It was great for a while. And I watched several waves of layoffs. I got to a point where in my own head, I was going to be there when they shut the lights out. I was going to be there to the end. I mean, it was just, I was Roadrunner. People would say that stuff and I would believe it. And I was always, it was again, and every time that they would let people go, I would be the one sitting there going, oh man, I'm so sorry to see you go, but I would still be there.
Yeah.
You know, in the end, you know, the people that were overseeing it over at Warner Music Group Atlantic, they're not metal people. Now, obviously, they're still doing cool stuff over there, which I'm happy about. I wasn't their guy. They looked at me as a holdover from that other thing.
Yeah. Okay.
And I wasn't part of the clique that were running it. They were pop guys doing pop stuff, and I was this long-haired freak in the corner, and they just let me do my thing because I was obviously good at it. At some point, you know, that when the layoffs were going to come again, you know, look, they look at the ledger sheet, and 21 years of love and respect. I had been treated very well by the label, with all that implies. And so now you get to a point where you start looking down and you're looking at numbers. And so now you got, well, there's a guy who worked underneath me in the New York, or he was our regional, who was much more their guy. And so they could put him in my job for less money because, again,
why wouldn't you?
It's and that's not an insult on anybody. It's like I was the VP, he was the regional. Of course, I was making more money than him, and I didn't see it coming, and that's silly on my part.
Okay.
Even the day it happened, when they called me down to HR, I still was walking down the hall going, I wonder what this is about. So I sat down in there and so the fact that it took me as a shock is really silly. But look, I was mad for about a year.
Yeah.
I still cheer them on, you know,
Sure.
at the time. And I was fueled because everyone in the business was shocked, amazed. Like, how do you get rid of the guy who is the company? Well, look, the company obviously goes on. You know, everyone likes to think this company can't exist without me. I'm, you know, irreplaceable. Well, I didn't think I was irreplaceable, but I did think that it was obviously a statement that they were going to move on from working heavy stuff. And so I figured, well, that's it. That's the end of Roadrunner as a brand, as a hard rock label.
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy that I was wrong. Obviously, I mean, look at what they're doing. Whether it be a Code Orange or well, hell, they're still trying to do the big stuff. You know, whether it be Korn and stuff like that. And, you know, they're still trying to do. I mean, Gojira obviously are about to become the next breakout band out of the metal scene. You know, it's like, thank you, Roadrunner. They're back in Gojira. Hello, that's great. So I'm happy to be wrong. Yeah, about a year I was really bitter, and I probably did some shit talking, but then I got over it. And
the story always ends this way, which is they're still doing cool shit, and it fundamentally isn't the way it was. But same as everything. The city you grew up in, the fucking toys you used to play with, the TV shows you used to watch, nothing's ever the same. So you just lump it with that stuff.
It can't stay the same.
Correct.
Everyone needs to evolve. I would say, and this, I know you got to get going, but you know, it's funny. I have always said about bands, because I think it applies. There's only 2 bands in history that, in my opinion, were allowed to not evolve: AC/DC and Motorhead. Everyone else has to evolve. Otherwise, it gets boring. That's, I think, a good analogy. You know, it's like everything has to evolve. Otherwise, it stagnates. Unless you are the rare anomaly of the greatest rock band to ever exist in AC/DC, or the very band that God inhabits.
Yep. Yeah, I'll close it off there. But thanks very much for joining me again. I can't let it rest. We should probably do. I'm thinking we should do another one, but maybe like get a third person involved and like do that in a